G'day brewers. Well, I know a lot of you love to make those hazy pale ales and New England IPAs, but some styles call for a crystal clear beer. Thinking about your rice lagers or your Pilsner beers where you want to be able to read the paper through that beer. It's so crystal brilliantly clear, and it's a sign of good technique. Well, in this video, I'm going to share with you my 5 top tips so that you can make the clearest beer possible. Stay with me. So let's talk about what makes a beer hazy in the first place. Well, we get haze proteins, which largely come from the malt in our beer, the grains. When we mash them in, we get these haze proteins, and that's why when you have a bottle, maybe it's sitting on a storage for a little while, you notice it looks crystal clear, and then you put it in the fridge and all of a sudden it's cloudy. What's happened? Well, it's these chill haze proteins. They come back into solution when that bottle gets chilled down. So that's our number one enemy. So we want to talk about things we can do to eliminate that. So my number one tip for minimizing your chill haze proteins in your final beer is to use adjuncts. Sugar that isn't malt. Maybe it comes from corn, maybe it comes from rice, maybe it comes from dextrose. But the more of these adjuncts you use to your finished beer, the less haze proteins you'll have because you're not using so much malt, and the clearer your final beer will be. That's why these styles like rice lagers are often crystal clear. So that's my number one tip. If you want clearer beer, you might want to add an adjunct to your grist so that you can get a clearer beer with less haze proteins. My number 2 hack for making a clear beer is to do a protein rest. Now this is usually around 50 degrees Celsius. And what you're doing in that rest phase is you're activating the proteases that will clip down and destroy those haze proteins. So you're trying to do this as part of your mash like usually most people, if you use a single infusion mash, are going to mash around 65, 66 degrees Celsius. But if you're going to start a little bit lower, maybe 10, 15 minutes or so, just at that 50 degree range, you're going to maximize those proteases, which will clip, destroy, break down your chill haze proteins so that less of them make it into your final beer. So the next step you can do to minimize the amount of chill haze in your finished beer is kettle finings. So as you're getting towards the end of the boil, maybe the 10-minute mark, you might add a Werflock tablet. And what that's going to do is going to bind to some of those proteins and drop them down into the bottom of the kettle so that they don't make it into the fermenter. And if they don't make it into the fermenter, they don't make it into your finished beer. So we've minimized the amount of proteins in our grist by using an adjunct like dextrose, corn or rice. Then we've done a protein rest at 50 degrees Celsius to break down any of those remaining proteins. Then we've added kettle finings at the end of our boil to drop any remaining proteins down to the bottom of our kettle. What's the next thing we can do? Well, for those proteins that make it into the fermenter, this is my hack number 4. Use a product like Brewer's Clarix. It's a vegan-friendly product, and what it does is it breaks down, again, some of those haze-producing proteins in the fermenter, usually added at the start of fermentation, to again eliminate some of those haze-producing proteins. Now, another thing you can do if you're not worried about being vegan-friendly is you can add some gelatin at the end of your fermentation. Now usually you do this before packaging, add the gelatin to the fermenter, let it bind to those proteins and drop them down to the bottom of your fermenter. Now, I didn't do that with this beer, my New Zealand Pilsner. So I'm ending up having to add it later on because it was a lot hazier than I was willing to accept. I didn't want to add these things because I didn't want any oxygen ingress to compromise the hop character of the beer. So I held off, but now I decided, okay, I want it clear. So I'm adding it directly to the fermenter. This would work a lot better probably when it's warm. You need to think about, if you're going to be silly like this, maybe add it to the gas post. I didn't in my case because I didn't have a gas disconnect to funnel these things in to the keg. So think ahead if you're going to do this. Don't be like me. Do it as soon as you package. Add it to the keg, let it fall down to the bottom to drop those, again, proteins out of solution. So my number 5 tip for producing the clearest beer you possibly can is to use a floating dip tube. Now these things can be a bit of a pain sometimes. Sometimes they get twisted around themselves and they don't uptake the beer the way you'd want them to. But they're excellent when they work well. Now, of course, that won't help if you're using bottles, but if you're packaging in a keg, it's a useful tool to try and get the clearest beer possible. And one more bonus tip. One problem that you might be experiencing that is causing your beer to remain hazy, check your water chemistry. Yeast likes at least 50 parts per million of calcium to flocculate and drop out a solution. If it doesn't get that, if your water doesn't have that 50 parts per million calcium, the yeast can't do its job properly and it can't get out of the way and it sits suspended in your beer. So consider that. If you're still having problems with your chill haze, check your water chemistry and make sure that that's right. If you enjoyed this video and this different style with some quick hacks and tips, then you might also like this one.